Am I the a-hole for walking away from my own success because my friend turned into a greedy CEO? Hi Reddit, first time poster here. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to ask this, but here we are. I'm 29M, and for most of my adult life, I've poured my heart and soul into a business I co-founded with my best friend, Michael, 30M. Michael and I have known each other since college. We met during our freshman year, bonded over our shared love of tech, and always dreamed about starting something together. In our final year, we came up with an idea, an AI-powered platform to help small businesses automate their customer interactions. It wasn't revolutionary, but it was something we were passionate about, and we believed we could make it work. So after graduation, instead of taking cushy corporate jobs like our parents wanted, we decided to go all in and build it from the ground up. It was a struggle at first. We worked out of Michael's garage, lived off instant noodles, and took on freelance gigs just to pay the bills. But after 2 years of grinding, we landed our first big client. That one deal gave us the traction we needed, and soon, we were securing more contracts, hiring a small team, and attracting investor interest. By the time we were both 27, our little startup had transformed into a multi-million-dollar company. We secured series of funding, moved into a real office, and expanded our team to over 50 employees. It felt surreal, like we had finally made it. But that's also when things started to change. Michael, who had always been my equal in every decision, started acting different. The company had always been our vision, but as soon as we got serious money involved, Michael started positioning himself as the sole visionary. He was the CEO, while I was CTO, which at first didn't bother me. We had agreed on those roles early on. But suddenly, it felt like my input mattered less and less. At board meetings, Michael would talk over me. When investors came in, he'd act like the company was his idea alone. He made major decisions without consulting me, like shifting our focus from small businesses to big enterprise clients, something I was against because it completely changed our mission. I confronted him about it multiple times, but he always brushed me off with, "Dude, you're overreacting. This is just business." I tried to let it go. I told myself that maybe I was being sensitive, maybe I was just bad at handling change. But then things got worse. Michael started pushing for cost-cutting measures that made my skin crawl. He wanted to lay off some of our earliest employees, the ones who had stuck with us when we had nothing, just to boost profits. He proposed changing our AI models in ways that would make them less accurate but cheaper to run. When I objected, he gave me the same line, "This is business." The final straw came when I found out, through an investor, not Michael, that he was negotiating a potential sale of the company. He hadn't even mentioned it to me. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. Instead, he had the audacity to say, "Come on, man. This is what we worked for. You should be excited." I wasn't excited. I was pissed. This company wasn't just about money for me, it was something we built with purpose. And now, Michael was willing to sell it off to the highest bidder, no matter what it meant for our employees, our customers, or even me. I told him I wasn't on board, and for the first time, he didn't even pretend to care. He just shrugged and said, "Then maybe it's time for you to move on." So I did. I walked away. I gave up my shares, yes, gave them up, because I refused to negotiate with someone who saw me as disposable. I didn't want to be part of a company that had lost its soul. At first, Michael didn't seem to care. He thought I was making a dramatic exit and that I'd regret it. But then, things started falling apart without me. Our engineers, most of whom I had personally hired, began quitting. Clients started complaining about the product's declining quality. And soon enough, the investors who had backed us started pulling out. Michael has been relentless in trying to get me back. At first, it was casual messages, stuff like, "Hey, let's grab a drink, man. Talk things out." I ignored them. Then he started emailing me, apologizing in a half-assed way, saying things like, "I know we had our differences, but the company needs you." I didn't respond. Then he called me. Over and over again. I finally picked up one night, mostly out of curiosity. He sounded different, less arrogant, more desperate. He told me things weren't going well, that the engineers he brought in after me didn't have the same vision, that the board was breathing down his neck because client retention was plummeting. I just listened. Then he hit me with, "Look, I messed up, okay? But we can fix this. We built this company together. You should be here. We need you." For a brief moment, I felt something. Not sympathy, exactly. More like déjà vu. It reminded me of when we were just two college kids, hyped about building something great. For a second, I thought about what it would be like to go back, to fix things, to restore the company to what it was supposed to be. But then I remembered everything. I remembered how he ignored me, talked over me, dismissed my concerns. I remembered how he cut me out of major decisions, how he was willing to sell the company without even telling me. I remembered how he had no problem pushing me aside until it started affecting his success. And suddenly, I felt nothing but exhaustion. So I told him the truth. "Michael, I don't think you actually want me back. I think you want someone to clean up your mess. And I'm not that person anymore." He got quiet. Then he sighed and said, "So that's it? You're really done?" And for the first time in a long time, I felt absolutely sure of my answer. "Yeah. I'm done." I hung up. A week later, I heard from one of our old engineers that Michael was really struggling. The investors were turning on him, the board was considering replacing him, and clients were dropping left and right. I won't lie, part of me felt a little satisfied. Not because I wanted him to fail, but because I warned him. I told him what would happen if he prioritized greed over people, if he treated the company like nothing more than a cash grab. After I hung up on Michael, I expected that to be the end of it. I had made my decision, and I felt at peace with it. But Michael wasn't done. A few days later, I got an email from one of the investors. Not just any investor, our biggest one, the guy who had pushed for our series of funding in the first place. He asked if we could meet for coffee. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. When we met, he got straight to the point: "We want you back. Not just as CTO. As CEO." That caught me off guard. Apparently, Michael's mismanagement had gotten so bad that the board was preparing to remove him. The investors saw me as the only person who could save the company from completely imploding. I won't lie, part of me felt vindicated. Michael had treated me like I was expendable, but now the people who mattered saw me as the only way forward. But I didn't say yes. Instead, I asked, "What happens to Michael?" The investor didn't even hesitate. "If you come back, he's out. Entirely." That's when I realized I was at a crossroads. I had two choices: to take back control, rebuild the company on my own terms, and prove that I had always been the real force behind its success. Or to walk away for good, let Michael deal with the fallout of his own choices, and focus on my new venture. And honestly, I wasn't sure what to do. On one hand, this was my company too. I had built it just as much as Michael had, arguably more, since I had been the one keeping things running while he played the big shot CEO. The idea of restoring it, of making it something I could be proud of again, was tempting. On the other hand, I had moved on. I had a new team, a new project, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel suffocated by corporate politics. Did I really want to step back into that world? So, Reddit, I'm turning this over to you. Should I take back the company and finally get the credit I deserve? Or should I leave it all behind and let Michael deal with the mess he created? Let me know what you think. And if you've ever been in a situation like this, I'd love to hear your perspective. Update: after posting my dilemma, I wasn't expecting such an overwhelming response. People had opinions. The comments were split. Some were saying I should take the company back and finally get the credit I deserved, while others argued that I should move forward and never look back. I spent the next few days thinking it over. I made lists. I even consulted a few people I trusted: my mentor, my parents, some of the early employees who had left after I did. Everyone had their own perspective, but ultimately, they all told me the same thing: I had to decide what kind of future I wanted. Then, Michael reached out one last time. He didn't call or email. He showed up at my office. My new office. The startup I had built after leaving him behind. I was in the middle of a meeting when my assistant poked her head in and whispered, "There's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." I stepped out, and there he was, Michael, looking nothing like the confident CEO I had known. He looked exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, his usually well-groomed hair was a mess, and he just looked small. "We need to talk," he said. I crossed my arms. "I think we've talked enough. Just 5 minutes." I sighed, gestured for him to follow me into an empty conference room, and shut the door. He sat down, ran a hand over his face, and let out a deep breath. "I screwed up," he admitted. "I thought I could do this without you. I was wrong." I didn't say anything. "The board is forcing me out," he continued. "The investors want you back. And honestly, They're right. You were always the one who actually gave a damn about this company." I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Part of me felt bad for him. This was a guy I had once called my best friend. But another part of me remembered everything he had done. How he had pushed me aside, how he had treated me like I was replaceable, how he had only come crawling back when he had no other options. "So what do you want from me, Michael?" I asked. He hesitated. Then he swallowed hard and said, "I want you to take it back. Fix it. Do what I couldn't." There it was. The official offer. The moment I had been waiting for. I could walk back in as CEO, finally own the success I had built, and take the company to where I had always envisioned. I could prove to everyone that I had been the real driving force all along. But then I thought about my new company. My new team. The people who believed in me, not because of my past, but because of what I was doing now. "I'm not coming back," I said. Michael's face fell. "What?" "You were right about one thing," I told him. "I was the one who actually cared. But I care about what I'm building now more than I care about fixing your Mista." He sat there in silence for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I get it." And for the first time, I think he actually did. A week later, I heard that Michael had officially been removed as CEO. The board brought in some outsider to try and salvage what was left, but honestly, I didn't care anymore. That chapter of my life was closed. Now, my new company is growing, slowly, but in the right way. I have a team that respects me, a mission I actually believe in, and for the first time in years, I don't feel like I have to prove anything to anyone. So yeah, I walked away from my own success. But honestly, it was the best decision I ever made, or so I thought. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had finally put the company, and Michael, behind me. I was wrong. About a month after I turned down the CEO offer, I got a call from one of my old engineers. He sounded tense. "Hey, man. Have you seen the news?" I hadn't. I had been too busy working on my new company to pay attention to whatever was happening with the old one. But the second I opened my phone, my stomach dropped. Headline: Former CEO accused of corporate fraud, startup in crisis. I clicked the article, my hands shaking. It turned out that Michael had been cooking the books. During his time as CEO, he had been falsifying revenue numbers to keep investors happy. The real reason the company had been crashing wasn't just bad leadership, it was because there was no money left. Investors had started digging after his removal, and what they found was worse than anyone expected. Lawsuits were already being filed. The SEC was investigating. Michael was facing potential criminal charges. And suddenly, my decision to walk away seemed like the only reason I wasn't caught in the middle of it. I barely had time to process it before my phone started blowing up. Reporters. Ex-investors. Former employees. Even some of the engineers who had stayed behind were reaching out, desperate to know if I had any idea what Michael had been up to. But the worst message? A text from Michael himself. "I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, man. I need help." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. Help? After everything? After the way he treated me? After the way he pushed me out, lied to me, lied to everyone? For the first time in my life, I had all the power. Michael was drowning, and he knew it. And the only person who could possibly throw him a lifeline was me. I stared at the text for what felt like an eternity. Every part of me wanted to just toss my phone aside, forget I had ever read it, and let him deal with the mess he had created. But there was something gnawing at me. Something about how vulnerable he sounded. Was this truly the same guy who once belittled me, threw me out like I was disposable, and made every decision based on his ego? Was this the same guy who had pushed me aside and acted like the company was his alone? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. How dare he? After everything? Did he really think I'd just swoop in and fix his mistakes? Did he expect me to save him from the consequences of his greed and incompetence? I closed my eyes, rubbed my temples, trying to think. But then another text came in. This time, it was from one of our former board members. He was trying to get a hold of me, but his message had a very different tone. "I know things are bad with Michael. But you were always the one who understood how the company worked. He's about to go under. If you don't step in, this could ruin you too. Please, we need you back. The investors will back you." I was being pulled in two directions. One part of me felt a strange sense of responsibility. This was my creation too, and if the company collapsed, it wasn't just Michael who would suffer. It would affect the employees, the customers, even the investors. I had a stake in this, whether I liked it or not. But then, I remembered the freedom I had gained by walking away. I had my own company now. People respected me. I wasn't just a cog in someone else's machine anymore. I wasn't fighting at that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. But the more I thought about it, the less clear it became. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, listening to my phone buzz with constant notifications. I couldn't even focus on the messages that were flooding in anymore. It felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. I had worked so hard to get away from all the toxic energy that Michael and his leadership had created. Now, with everything falling apart, I had to decide if I was willing to dive back into that mess. I had built something new for myself, something that felt right, where I was in control, where people respected me for what I brought to the table, not just as someone cleaning up another person's disaster. But what if I could fix it? What if this was my opportunity to right the wrongs, to bring the company back to the roots that I had envisioned, and to show the world that I wasn't just the one who got pushed out? What if this was my shot to finally prove to Michael, and to myself, that I was the one who should have been running things all along? That's when the calls from the investors started getting more urgent. I could tell they were starting to panic. One of them, a woman I had worked closely with when we were first launching, called and said, "You're our last hope. If you don't come in now, it'll be over. Michael is going to ruin everything. We need you." The desperation in her voice was enough to make me feel a little sick. These were people I had trusted, people who knew the work we had put in from the ground up. But did I really want to be the person to go back in and clean up his mess? That night, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't focus on my new company, or even the friends who were reaching out to check in. The weight of Michael's failure was hanging over everything, and I couldn't escape it. Finally, at around 3 a.m., I did what I knew deep down I had to do. I texted Michael. "I'll help you. But it's not because I'm doing you any favors. It's because I'm trying to save what we started, even if you've lost sight of it." I hit send. Almost immediately, he responded. "Thank you. You have no idea how much this means. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I wasn't sure if he meant that, but I had already made up my mind. It wasn't about saving him. It was about saving the company that I had poured everything into, that we had both sacrificed so much for. I wasn't going to let everything I built go down in flames just because Michael had lost his way. But here's the kicker, as I agreed to step in and help him, I wasn't just thinking about fixing the financials or turning the company around. I realized something else that scared me even more. By stepping back in, I wasn't just taking on the responsibility for the company, I was taking on a role that might require me to confront everything I had left behind. The egos. The manipulation. The power struggles. Would I be able to walk that line without falling back into the trap Michael had set up? Would I be able to navigate the very mess I had been running from? And the biggest question of all, could I actually trust him again? I went back and forth, weighing everything I'd built against everything I had walked away from. My gut was telling me I could make this work, that I could save the company, but every part of me was screaming that I had already done enough. I had earned my freedom. I had earned the right to leave it all behind, but then I thought about the people, the employees who had stuck around, the investors who had believed in the original vision. It wasn't just Michael's failure I was dealing with anymore. It was ours. The company had started as a team effort, and if I walked away completely, I'd be leaving them all to deal with the fallout alone. The next morning, I reached out to a few trusted advisors, people who had been in my corner through all the years. I told them about the situation, laid everything out on the table, Michael's mess, the investors begging me to step in, the weight of the decision hanging over me. One of them, my old mentor, said something that stuck with me: "You're not just saving the company anymore. You're saving your legacy. Whether you want to admit it or not, this is your creation too. And you can't let someone else run it into the ground." It hit me hard. I had always seen myself as the guy who could walk away without looking back. But was that really the right move in the end? My legacy was tied to this company, even if I hadn't been the one to wear the CEO title. That evening, I made the call. I told Michael the first would help him, but under my terms. I wouldn't just step in as a savior, I would take control of the situation, rebuild it from the ground up. I made it clear that this would be a partnership, one where he would have to prove that he had learned from his mistakes and was willing to step back into a more limited role. No more of this power-hungry CEO nonsense. There was silence on the other end of the line before Michael responded, almost in a whisper. "I'll do whatever it takes." It wasn't a promise. It was a plea. And it made me realize just how far gone things really were. The next few weeks were a blur. I started meeting with the board, getting to grips with the mess that Michael had left behind. The fraud allegations were a mess, but there was still hope to rebuild the company's reputation if we acted quickly. I brought in a new financial team to clean up the books and implemented stricter controls so we wouldn't fall into the same traps again. But even with all the work we were doing, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about me confronting everything I had been running from. The toxic environment. The power struggles. The manipulation. Michael was trying to salvage what he could, but I knew deep down I couldn't let him walk all over me again. In one of our meetings, I had to lay down the law. "This is my show now, Michael," I said, locking eyes with him. "If you're staying on, you're doing it my way. You don't get to call the shots anymore." He looked at me, defeated, and nodded. "I understand, but it wasn't over yet." We still had so much to fix, and while things were moving in the right direction, I could feel the tension building. The investors were watching me closely, waiting for results. The employees were unsure whether this new version of the company could succeed. And Michael. He was still there, still in the background, his presence looming over everything. I wasn't sure how long I could keep this up. It felt like the more I fixed, the more it broke. The longer I spent in this limbo, the more it felt like I was wading through quicksand. Every day, I'd fix one problem, only for two more to pop up in its place. The fraud investigation was ongoing, and the public relations nightmare wasn't going to disappear overnight. The board was pressuring me to show immediate results, but the damage Michael had caused was so deep that it felt like rebuilding the company's reputation from the ground up might take years. Michael's role had become more and more like that of a figurehead. He was still technically there, but it felt like I was the one steering the ship now. Every time I thought about stepping in fully as CEO, the idea seemed more and more tempting. I was doing all the work anyway, and with him continuing to take credit for things he had no part in, I was starting to resent him more and more. The worst part was, every time I tried to call him out, he'd apologize, swear he was doing his best, and promise to change. But I knew better than to trust him at face value. I could feel the company's pulse. Employees who had stuck with us through thick and thin were starting to get frustrated, feeling like they were walking on eggshells with all the uncertainty hanging over them. Morale was low, and even some of our top investors were talking about pulling out if things didn't improve. It wasn't just about numbers anymore, it was about the soul of the company. One day, I got a call that changed everything. It was from the law firm handling the fraud investigation. They had uncovered more than just the financial mess. They had found emails and internal communications that were damning, documents showing Michael's role in the fraudulent activities, his decision to cover up massive losses, and even evidence of his attempts to divert funds into his personal accounts. The situation was worse than I had thought, and it wasn't just about fixing the company anymore. Michael was going to be in deep trouble. This wasn't just about him getting fired. He was facing serious charges now. The kind that could ruin him forever. And because he was still technically listed as the CEO, the company could be dragged down with him. I knew I had to make a decision fast. Do I step in, take the reins officially, and push for everything to be turned around, even if that meant cutting ties with Michael completely? Or do I give him the benefit of the doubt, try to help him out of this hole, and risk everything I had worked for? I called Michael that night. I told him everything. I let him know that this wasn't just about the company anymore, it was about his future, his freedom. And honestly, I didn't know if he'd make it through this. "Michael, you need to come clean," I told him, my voice steady, but with a hint of frustration. "We need to act fast, or everything we built will be destroyed, and so will you." For the first time in months, he was silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was shaky. I don't know how it got this far." I didn't have the energy to listen to excuses anymore. The longer we waited, the harder it would be to fix everything. I made it clear, either he would step down, admit to his wrongdoings, and let me clean up this mess, or I would go public with everything and make sure the company wasn't tied to him any longer. "I've done all I can for this company, Michael," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I'm going to save it, with or without you." He paused again, and I could hear him breathing heavily. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes. But I'm not going down alone." That night, he sent over a resignation letter. He didn't fight me. He didn't ask for more time. He knew it was over. And that's when I realized something. As much as I had hoped for a fresh start, for a clean slate without him, I had just signed up for the battle of a lifetime. The pressure was on, And the stakes were higher than ever. I had officially taken the reins, but now, I had to prove I could turn the company around before it was too late. But I wasn't sure if I had the strength for it. The weight of the company, its future, and everything Michael had ruined was on my shoulders. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who had invested in us, who had worked for us, and who had believed in the vision. Could I really bring it all back? The next few months were a blur of non-stop meetings, restructuring, and putting out fires that Michael had left in his wake. I'd always thought I was prepared for the pressure, but nothing could have prepared me for the full weight of running a company in crisis. I barely slept, barely ate, and every day felt like I was drowning in decisions that could make or break the company. I made bold moves, cutting ties with some of the shady investors Michael had brought in, hiring new leadership who shared my vision, and restructuring the company to make it leaner and more efficient. Slowly, things started turning around. But even as the company began to recover, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been fighting a losing battle from the start. And the hardest part? I never fully knew if I was doing the right thing. I had spent years building something I was proud of, but now, it felt like I was just trying to keep it afloat for the sake of everyone who depended on it. Was I saving it because it was worth saving? Or was I just doing it to prove I could? As for Michael, he was out of the picture for good. I made sure of that. His legal battles were just beginning, and though I didn't relish it, I knew I had to be the one to cut ties completely. I couldn't let his mistakes drag me down. Now that things were stabilizing, I had to step back and ask myself, did I make the right choice by stepping in at all? Was it worth all the stress, the late nights, the sacrifices? Or should I have just walked away and let the company burn? So, Reddit, after all of this, am I the a-hole for stepping in to fix Michael's mess, or should I have walked away from it all? Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.